What's the biggest band to come out of Germany? For me, it has to be the Scorpions, one of the greatest hard rock bands of all time. This band have been going for over 50 years. They've sold over 100 million albums, 74 singles, 27 compilation album, and today we're going to go through the ranking of their 18 studio albums. Let's get ready to krautrock. Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today we're going to be going and doing the ranking of the Scorpions album. The Scorpions. They're one of the greatest bands ever. Not only just out of Germany, but out of anywhere really. And they're one of my favourite bands. I just love them. I think they're the essential band of hard rock and great power balance. They've just got that great balance right. And as I said in the introduction, they've been going since 1965. What's that, 56 years? A ridiculous amount of time. They're still going strong now. They're currently writing a new album, and hopefully they'll be playing live in the next year, within the next year, when obviously the COVID restrictions allow. So today we're going to go through all their studio albums. Now, as I said, they've done a lot of compilation albums, whether that be live albums, you know, best of rockers, best of ballads, best of rockers and ballads. They did an album with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, which is again a superb album, by the way. But I'm not going to review all of those sort of albums. Acoustic albums. I mean, let's face it, if you've been going that long, there's all kinds of different types of albums you've done. But we're just going to go through the 18 studio albums today. Now, the Scorpions, you could probably say, cover sort of three distinct eras. There was the sort of early 70s to the late 70s, with when Uli John Roth was the guitarist, more sort of a little bit more psychedelic, a little bit, you know, on the way to hard rock, but much more Hendrix sort of influence in terms of the guitar playing. Then their real sort of pomp period, really, from sort of like late 70s up to sort of like the early 90s, really. This was their biggest commercial sort of era. They were really then a big hard rocking band. Then, you know, the 90s saw them doing a little bit of experimenting. They did some albums with some, you know, they did a concept album. They did an album with a lot more sort of keyboards and drum sort of machines in them. But recently they are obviously slowing down a little bit. They're not releasing as many albums as they used to. But they've sort of tried to hone that sort of that 80s period and sort of take it into sort of the 21st century, really. So, without further ado, let's start with album number 18. Album number 18 is their debut, Lonesome Crow. Now, this came out way back in the early 70s, and it had actually had Michael Schenker on lead guitar. He was only 16 at the time. It's very much sort of that transition from 60s to 70s music, much more psychedelic, much more far removed from their sort of 70s and 80s. It's an interesting album to listen to, but it's so far departed from the sort of stuff that we know the Scorpions by. For me, it can only make the last position in 18th. In 17th, we've got a more modern album. Now, this was in their experimental phase. So the 17th position, we've got Eye to Eye. This came out with a lot more keyboards, more layered sounds, more layered vocals. We've got drum machines. There's very little guitar, and certainly lead guitar in it. Someone once said that this album sounds a bit like Scorpions being Savage Garden, and I can see the comparison there. It's not the Scorpions that we know and love, really. There's some interesting songs on there. I do like the track Skywriter, even the opener Mysterious. And probably the best track on there, which is the last track, 14 tracks there was on this album, A Moment in a Million Years. It's one of their best ballads, I think, they've done since probably Send Me an Angel. So Eye to Eye only makes 17th position. In 16th position, another fairly modern album, Pure Instinct. This came out in the 90s. It's a little bit too slick. It's a bit overly reliant on ballads. There's a lot of ballads on this album. The opener and the single Wild Child almost sounds like the Scorpions of old, but they couldn't really keep up with that sort of style of song. And it's just so slick and a little bit overly produced. The ballad, When You Came Into My Life, is probably the key ballad out of a lot of ballads on this album, but nothing else really sticks out. So that's why I'm putting Pure Instinct in 16th position. In 15th position is Taken by Force. The first album with Herman Rarebell on drums. At this point, this was the last album with Uli Jon Roth, and they were becoming a little bit stale in terms of their sort of early 70s sort of output. They needed a bit of fresh impetus, and that really happened on the next album with Matthias Jab. Nothing really from Taken by Force that really sticks out as a song, so I'm putting it in 15th position. In 14th position is Fly to the Rainbow. This was the first album with Uli Jon Roth. It's a bit more harder than their original, their debut album. The psychedelic elements are sort of are going a little bit. There's still some elements in there, but it's starting to get a bit more hard rock. And there's a very big, Uli Jon Roth he's obsessed with Jimi Hendrix, so there's a very much a Jimi Hendrix type of guitar sound throughout the whole album. Speedy's Coming is probably the best song on this album, but Fly to the Rainbow is in 14th position. Again, now we're getting into their slightly better albums in that 70s period, in Trance. This was starting to get into more hard rock. The psychedelic elements were fewer and fewer at this point. And this was the first album with Dieter Dierks, who was their long-time producer, produced most of their albums throughout the 80s. This was the first one where he was introduced. Top of the bill, probably the first, but definitely not their last, song about life on the road. They seem to be quite obsessed with writing songs like that, and it's probably the highlight track from this album. But In Trance makes 13th position. Then we've got 12th position, another early album, Virgin Killer. It's probably the second best album of theirs of the 70s though. Probably best to ignore that sort of ill-informed cover choice, the original cover. A lot more hard rocking, great songs. I think Uli Jon Roth is almost playing less sort of Hendrix in a Hendrix style. The big songs for me, the first two though, Picture Life and Catch Your Train, real great hard rocking. Uli Jon Roth, he actually sings on to a couple of these songs on this album, Polar Nights and Hellcat, and his voice is nowhere near as good as Klaus Meine. He should be best off sticking to the guitar playing. So Virgin Killer in 12th position. Now, 11th position, we're getting some into the more modern stuff, Sting in the Tail. This is a big album about rock. I'll tell you why, because there's 4 songs on this album. They've got rocking, we've got Raised on Rock, we've got Rock Zone, we've got Let's Rock, we've got The Spirit of Rock. If there was ever an album that we should got points for the amount of times the word rock is mentioned, this is the one. There's nothing wrong with this album. I mean, it is a classic sort of Scorpion sound, but it's a little bit by the numbers in terms of the songs on it. Nothing really, there's not loads of real great songs on there. It feels like you've heard a lot of them before, but better versions of them. Probably the best song for me again is the ballad, which is called The Good Die Young, and this was actually a duet with the ex-Nightwish singer Tarja Turunen. I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation. I think she's Norwegian. So the Sting of the Tail makes 11th position. So now we're getting into the top 10. In 10th position is Unbreakable. Now, after some of those sort of poorer albums in the sort of mid to late 90s, the Scorpions have returned to somewhat back to form with this album. There's a real great trademark rockers and some real great heartfelt ballads in here. Certainly the opener, New Generation, is great. Some Days Now is another good song. I think Unbreakable, if you hadn't heard Scorpions since the sort of 80s stuff, is probably the album that you should listen to. Probably one of the better albums in the sort of newer period. So Unbreakable makes number 10. In number 9 is Face the Heat. Now, this album was released in '93. We know we're at the point in time where hard rock is always out of fashion, and there's much more grunge music is almost dominant in the rocking sort of scene. This album is a little bit darker. A lot of bands decided to go darker when the grunge took hold. This is certainly darker. Certainly, opener Alienation is quite dark and pretty heavy. But this some great songs on this album. I like that opener, you know, Alienation, a real powerful song. And then Under the Same Song, Under the Same Sun is really good. But probably my favourite track is Woman, a real sort of, I don't know whether you call it, it was a mid-paced rocker, but it's sort of slow and atmospheric. It's quite different than a lot of Scorpions songs, but I really like it. That's my favourite track. And Face the Heat makes 9th position. In 8th position, we've got their latest album, Return to Forever. Now, this was an album that had that was basically a lot of reworkings of tracks that they'd started, or they didn't quite make the albums in the 80s, you know, in terms of their sort of big 80s albums. So when you think of these are leftover sort of ideas and tracks, you're thinking it's going to be a bit disappointing, but actually it was a great album. The rockers on there are brilliant. The ballads are even greater. I think they've got some other people coming in and helping them craft these songs. So they've got some extra songwriters coming in to make them, fine tune them and make them really good. Key tracks on here: House of Cards, Going Out with a Bang, and We Built This House. I mean, I think it was I was really excited when this album came out. I thought it was a real return to form, really. It was the sort of 80s sort of sound, but just brought into the sort of into the 21st century. I think it's a great album, and it's definitely worth a listen to. So I'm putting Return to Forever in 8th position. In 7th position is their sort of loose concept called Humanity Hour 1. This was the album that I actually saw them, the only time I've seen them live, and they were brilliant. You know, this is at a time where, you know, they were all sort of kicking, you know, they're all in their late 60s now, and you think, you know, they got the energy, but they put on a brilliant performance. This album, they played quite a few tracks from this album, but they also played all the sort of songs that you wanted to hear from their sort of 70s and 80s period. It was almost a perfect set list for me. So this album really, you know, they brought in another album where they brought in other writers. Desmond Child, you know, a lot of people have heard of Desmond Child. He co-wrote a lot of songs by Motley Crue and Bon Jovi and Alice Cooper and bands like that, and Aerosmith. So he came in and he wrote some songs, and I think that the songs are really good. It's probably it is their best album of of the 2000s, and it's got some guests on it. Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins actually appears on one of the tracks. So Humanity Hour 1, I think, is a really good track, and it's worthy of 7th position. I don't know whether anyone agrees with that, because it's quite a lot of people have got different opinions of where this is, but I saw them live, they played the songs live. I think the songs are really good. So Humanity Hour 1 in 7th position. Now, in 6th position, Crazy World. Now, this is their hands down the best album of the 90s for the Scorpions, and it's, of course, the one with Wind of Change on it. I mean, when this song was released, it was #1 in about 18 countries. It's the best-selling single by a German artist. I think it's like 14 million copies of it sold. But it's not even the best ballad on the album. I think that the best ballad is Send Me an Angel. I think it's a superior song. But obviously, that Wind of Change sort of took Scorpions to a new level, really, in terms of their sort of commercial successes, really. But the album's got lots of their it's not ballads, certainly. It's got a lot of hard rocking songs on it. Kicks After Six, Don't Believe Her, Love or Lust. It's really good. We've got Dieter Dierks is no longer the producer. I think Keith Olsen was the producer on this, so it's a little bit slickly produced. And as I said, it's by far their best album of the 90s. So in 6th position, Crazy World. So now we're heading into the top 5, and I think there's a lot of albums in here that a lot of people that are fans of the Scorpions will probably, they may be in slightly different order, but your top 5 won't be that much different than mine. In 5th position, I'm putting Animal Magnetism. So this was sort of sandwiched between probably the slightly superior albums of Love Drive and Blackout. But it's definitely a good album. I think it came out in 1980, this. You've got Lady Starlight on there, which is a great sort of ballad. And also, obviously, the real riff-tastic Anthem, The Zoo, one of the Scorpions' best songs is on this. So it's still a great album, and I put it in 5th position. In 4th position, and it's a favourite of mine, and I do love listening to this album, but again, it didn't review that well when it came out, and this is Savage Amusements. I actually reviewed this album on its own a few months ago, so if you want to check out the link up here, then you can go and listen to that full review of the album. But I do love Savage Amusements. I mean, it's underappreciated. It was the Scorpions trying to make an album full of, you know, singles, basically their version of Hysteria to somewhat. You know, there's lots of little production stuff on it that makes, you know, with different sounds and different effects. It's definitely, I'm sure it's a little polished. It would have been great to see it live, but they got some Rhythm of Love, one of their best songs, Don't Stop at the Top, and probably the heaviest song, Love on the Run. I think it's a classic album. It's quite short, but it's every song on it I think is good. So I'm giving Savage Amusements my 4th position. Top 3. 3rd position has to be Love Drive. This is the first album with Matthias Jabs. I mean, Michael Schenker did sort of come into the band just as they were making it, and he appears that he plays lead guitar on a couple of the tracks, but he didn't really last to come back into the band. So Matthias Jabs joined, and he's been with the band ever since. I think it's really the start of their real golden period, really. So a lot more, you know, more hard rocking sort of solos and guitar sound in it, moving completely away from that sort of Hendrix sound from Minijov Roth. The title track is great. A tastefully titled Another Piece of Me is a real interesting, fun song. But for me, the standout track on Love Drive has to be Holiday. It's a great ballad. Starts off nice and slow, and then really starts rocking. It's a great album, Love Drive, and I'm giving it my 3rd place. Okay, top 2. Which one is going to be number 1? Well, in 2nd place, I've got to put Love at First Sting. I mean, this is a superb album. You know, it was difficult to put this one in 2nd or 1st. There's so many great songs. I mean, Rock You Like Hurricane, what a rock anthem. It's probably, you know, it's up there with the top rock anthems of all time. Bad Boys Running Wild, Coming Home, and probably one of the best ballads, Still Loving You. It's a great album, and it's probably an essential pick for any Scorpions fan, really. So Love at First Sting in 2nd place. So that means in 1st place, the number 1 Scorpions album, this is my opinion, of course, has to be Blackout. I mean, that title track, when you first hear that, you know, that sort of riff on that title track is absolutely superb. No One Like You, Now, Dynamite, China White, When the Smoke Is Going Down. I mean, it's got so many songs. It's all killer and no filler. And I think Blackout has to be their best album. It's just a little bit better, in my opinion, than Love at First Sting. Not that much, but I still think Blackout in 1st position is the best Scorpions album there is. So that's my ranking of the Scorpions album. I'm really interested to know what you think. You know, maybe you're a massive fan of Uli John Roth. Maybe you think those early 70s albums are great, and they sort of went downhill after that. Maybe there's some of those sort of later albums in the 90s and in the, you know, the 2000s that maybe you got more out of than I did. I'm interested to know what you think, and I'm interested to know what your ranking is. So let me know your favourite Scorpions album. Let me know what you think of my ranking. What would you change? I think out of the ranking videos I've done, I don't think it's as controversial as a lot of the others. I think there's a lot of Scorpions fans out there that would pick something fairly similar. But I'm interested to know what you think. Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please hit like. Please subscribe, because we're doing lots of different ranking videos. I'm probably some of the bands that I'm going to be doing next, just so you know, I'm going to do Wasp. So if you're a fan of Wasp, then please subscribe so you know when that comes out. And I might do another ranking from Metallica as well. And there'll be a few different ones here, less well-known bands. But maybe there's a ranking of a band that's a classic rock band, a hard rock, heavy metal band from the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s that you'd like me to do a ranking of. You know, let me know in the comments. And, you know, as long as I've got, you know, knowledge of this band, then there's no reason why I wouldn't do it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until the next one, keep on rocking.